Well, we read today, at least I read today, that China has now surpassed the United States in terms of total exports. The gross domestic product of China is about $7.2 trillion. The United States is about $15 trillion. So we're twice as large an economy, and yet their exports are bigger than ours, #1 in the world. And so you say, well, the biggest threat facing America is China. Well, according to our next guest, the biggest threat facing America may not be China or terrorism or any foreign country, or even our national debt. The biggest problem we face, he says, is something from our own homes. Take a look.
For years, we've been warned there are too many people in the world, that we're running out of land, food, and everything else needed to sustain an overpopulated planet. But author Jonathan Last says the biggest crisis facing the United States and the world is just the opposite. He's written a book called What to Expect When No One's Expecting: America's Coming Demographic Disaster. Last says the greatest threat to life in America is us and our collective unwillingness to have more kids. He says that unless we change our views about the value of raising children, America faces a bleak future. Disease, war, and economic collapse are all on the horizon as the fertility rate plummets and our population declines.
Well, we've got the author of an intriguing book, What to Expect When No One is Expecting: America's Coming Demographic Disaster. Jonathan Last joins us now from Washington. Jonathan, good to have you. I was interested in reading your book. I want to take issue with one thing, though. I'm a father of 4, and I want you to know, when we were having little children growing up, it was a pleasure. Sure, it cost a lot of money, but you made it sound like it's kind of a real drag on people, and it's very expensive. Tell us about it.
Well, it is. It's enormously expensive. One of the things I discovered when researching the book is that when you total up all of the costs, you include college and missing wages and child care, it costs just an average middle-class couple over $1 million to raise a child in America today. That's just an enormous amount of money. It's like buying 5 houses all at once. And this cost has increased a lot since 1965. And so this is one of the reasons people just haven't been able to have as many children as they want to.
All right. Let's go to some figures. What do you have to sustain the population? Is it 2.1 births per thousand?
That's 2.1 births per woman per lifetime.
Per woman, not per thousand, per woman.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So the average woman needs to have 2.1 children over the course of her lifetime in order to keep your population stable. That's what demographers call the replacement rate.
There was a columnist up in New England who was well prominent, and she jumped all over me, said, Mr. Robertson seems to think that the woman's womb is a national resource. I didn't take that too kindly, but is that what you're saying?
No, not at all. I mean, the truth is, America has changed quite a lot in the last 40 years, and there are a lot of women who, and men, frankly, who don't want to have children, who view families as sort of an impediment to the lifestyle that they'd like to have. And that's fine, the truth is. But one of the interesting things I discovered when researching this book is that when demographers talk about ideal fertility, that's the number of children that the average woman and man say they want to have. In America, that number is 2.5, and it's been constant for 40 years. So despite all the talk about, women not wanting this and men not wanting it and people wanting to focus on careers themselves, the truth is Americans still want bigger families. They just haven't been able to have them. We haven't been above the replacement rate since 1973 in this country. And that gap between our real fertility and our ideal fertility, I think, really speaks to all the changes that we've had that have made it harder for people to have the families they really want.
Jonathan, what is the consequence of this? You put it up very eloquently in the book, but I'll let you say it. What will happen if or if a nation, for example, does not keep the replacement rate going? What happens?
Well, all sorts of bad things happen, and some of them are obvious. Like you would expect that our entitlement programs, Medicare and Social Security, they became very difficult to maintain because you have too many people who are retired, not enough younger workers working to support those systems. But then there are these other downstream effects, too. It becomes very hard to sustain a dynamic economy because consumption shifts downward, innovation dries up. and capital pools begin to shift because you have older people who are looking to draw down their investments and not enough young people looking to invest their capital and grow it over the course of their lifetimes. And then you wind up with, it becomes difficult to even sustain national defense. I mean, first of all, there's just the money, as you're shifting money out of your military spending from the Pentagon and over to the Social Security Office. And then just in terms of having the people of military age, of 18 to 24, there just aren't enough of them to field a military.
Give us some of the horror stories. Japan, Europe, France, what's happening?
So think about Japan. Remember in the 1980s when we were all going to go work for the Japanese? The Japanese were buying up Rockefeller Center, and Toyota had surpassed General Motors. And we were talking about how we were going to have to teach all of our kids in the public schools how to speak Japanese if they were going to earn a living. Well, even back then in the 1980s, Japan's demographers were warning the Japanese people that their fertility rate was so low that they could never sustain their economic growth. And then in 1990, Japan went into this enormous recession. Japanese people called it the lost decade, but it's still going today. It's now been 23 years of economic recession. And both economists and demographers in Japan now say that this is all because of their fertility rate. They weren't able to sustain their human capital. And what's going to happen over the next century is that Japan is going to lose a little more than 50% of its entire population.
Why? I mean, I was stationed in Japan during the Korean War for a while. I didn't see those Japanese people unwilling to have sex with each other. So what's the deal? I mean, why don't they want to have babies?
Well, part of it is an unwillingness to have sex. There's an amazing study that came out a few months ago surveying teenage boys in Japan. And something like a quarter of teenage boys between the ages of 15 and 19, said that they thought even the idea of sex with a woman was disgusting to them. This is, the first country in the world where you have teenage boys who think like that. But the other part of what's happened in Japan is their marriage culture has suffered. The rates of marriage in Japan have fallen dramatically over the last 40 years, and their rates of divorce have increased.
Well, now, let's focus on Europe. Europe used to be the big player on the world scene. Let's say 50 years ago. Europe dominated, and it shrunk. Is that the result of not having babies in places like France and Germany and Spain?
It is. And in France, they've had a long-standing attempts to raise their fertility rate. They've been working on that since World War I, actually. And the truth is, the only thing that's really succeeded in helping France's fertility rate is the massive amounts of immigration they've gotten from northern Africa. But you look over in Germany. Germany is already losing population, and the effects in Germany are really astonishing. The field of urban planning in Germany has gone from figuring out how to build cities into turning out how to downsize their cities. They now study how can you take out city blocks and buildings and factories that are abandoned. You have wolves returning. This is literally true. Packs of wolves returning to towns in East Germany where they haven't been in 400 years because there just aren't enough people around to convince the animals to stay out in the woods.
Well, the governments have done a number of things to try to encourage fertility. What have they done, and why haven't they worked?
Well, in general, you have two types of pro-natalist policies. You have what I call liberal policies, like in France and Scandinavia, which typically revolve around setting up state-run networks of daycare centers to help mothers work more easily. And then you have more conservative attempts, like things like tax incentives, which you see in places like Singapore and Japan. And the truth is, neither of them have been particularly effective. And that's because it turns out, it's really hard raising a child. It's really hard having a family. And, these little incentives, these little nudges just aren't going to do it. What you really need to do is forget the government. You have to work on changing the culture, changing our attitudes towards family, and helping people realize that families are important. They're important to the now and important to the future.
We've found that religious belief plays a large part in this, that you have to have a belief in a future, and you have to think that something's going on past you, or you won't try to make a future generation. You didn't address that very much in your book, did you, or did you?
I do. I talk about it in the book because it's fascinating. Demographers in America have studied religious belief and its effect on fertility for a long time. And what they found in the early 20th century was there was a big difference between what you believed. The Catholics had more babies in general than the Protestants did. The Protestants had more babies than the Jews did. But beginning in the 1950s and 1960s, those sectarian differences began to shrink. And what we now see is there's almost no difference between the religious sects. all of the difference is between religious practice. And so what matters it is not what you believe, but how much you really believe it, how often you go to services. And so if you just go on Christmas and Easter, you have one fertility rate. If you go every month to church or synagogue, your fertility rate is higher than that. The people in America with the highest fertility rate, and in fact they're well above replacement rate, they're about 2.35, are the people who go to church services once a week. And it doesn't matter what religion you are. You could be Protestant, Catholic, Jew. If you show up at church once a week, that's what it really speaks to. It speaks to believing in the future, believing in something bigger than what we are right here and right now.
Jonathan, thank you very much. His book, ladies and gentlemen, is called What to Expect When No One's Expecting. It's very intriguing, and I think you'll find it a very good read. Now, you can get it where books are sold, and for those of you who are evangelicals, I just want to tell you there's hope. You can outbreed those others who don't agree with you, and that's what's going to happen. The Muslims are certainly doing it. They have about 7 kids per family or something. So.
Well, that is true. A lot of those countries in Europe where
I don't think
people
it's worked for Ireland, though. They seem to be having some problems. But in any event, it's an intriguing thing. He goes down the list of the countries, what they've done, what doesn't work, and he points to Singapore, which deliberately tried to kill the birth rate and the devastating effects it's had on that country. So it's very interesting. Jonathan Last.
Great title.